It's a great question. And I think the best way to describe it is something that we've all probably experienced, right? Because we've all probably downloaded an app, right? So you download the app, you've been using it for a while, something comes up and it says, hey, do you like using this? And you either say yes or no. And if you say yes, it's like, great, leave us a review on the App Store, or would you be willing to leave us a review on the App Store? If you say no, it says, hey, bring this information to us and we'll deal with it back channel.
Thank you for listening to Dental Marketing Theory. I'm your host, Gary Bird. Today, I got the opportunity to speak with Dr. Matt Allen. He is the CEO and founder of DifferentKind. He's going to walk through his dental journey. He's going to share with us how he went from folk band all the way into being a dentist, and eventually that led to a year-long sabbatical and launching a company. And I'm really excited about his product that he's launching, and I think it'll bring massive value to the industry. He's solving a lot of big problems between patient and doctor communication, and how patients can easily find the best clinician that fits their needs. Stay tuned. Hey, Dr. Matt, good to have you on today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Gary. Really excited to be here with you.
So something that we like to start this show with is something personal, and you happen to be into something that I'm really into, and that is coffee. I see it. It wasn't in your last background. You got something over your left shoulder there. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I love coffee, and obviously you do too. We were just talking right before we came on, talking about Michael Pollan and his experiments with not drinking coffee for 3 months. And I was like, man, I don't think I could do that. But I was recommending for anyone who's listening, The Monk of Mocha, which is a book by Dave Eggers about kind of where coffee originated in Yemen, and now they have this really beautiful coffee that they make from there that is extraordinarily expensive and awesome. So it's a cool story though. It tells about how coffee came to Europe and whatever. So which he mentions in that podcast. That is my Chemex. That's our Offie coffee machine. So
what kind of coffee are you drinking right now?
So I live in rural Colorado. We don't have any like really good coffee here, any like good fourth wave coffee. So yeah, it's a little sad. There's a roastery down the street. I'm drinking something from there
Awesome.
Today, but it's not quite. My favorite is this place in Denver called Huckleberry Roasters. If you're in Denver, come check out Huckleberry. They're wonderful and delicious.
That's awesome. Yeah. I love fourth wave coffee, by the way. So if you know, if you don't, that's okay too. So, all right. So the reason that we're talking today is you reached out a while ago. We started talking about some of the things that you were working on, and you shared some of your journey with how you got to where you're at now. And it's a fascinating story. And how you got into dentistry, and then how you, especially at the beginning, is really interesting. You have a very unique how you became a dentist, and then how that kind of led down your path. So would you mind sharing some of that story with our listeners today?
Totally. That's funny. I was thinking about it on the drive over here this morning, and there were some funny parts that I didn't mention. So I'm excited to share those with you too last time when we were chatting. But yeah, I mean, I think, my story starts probably similarly to many dentists, or at least many dentists that I've heard of. That my dad was a dentist when I was growing up. So I kind of was around it, saw it. I was super passionate about helping people during dental school. Was in Guatemala doing some dental work down there. It's like, man, that would be really great to be able to do some of this. But rewind just a little bit. So I think the interesting part of the story I went to school at Pepperdine liberal arts college in Malibu. So lots of tears for where I went to college. It was a very sad place to attend while we were taking surfing classes. But I had literally turned in my change of schedule. My freshman year, like registered as a bio major or whatever, and I was in a band, and my best friend was with me in the band. He was a model. He like had connections. We're like, sweet, we're gonna go somewhere. We're gonna change the world. We're gonna be folk rock stars. And so yeah, I like literally had picked out the easiest classes that I could, because I was like, I'm gonna drop out. It doesn't matter. Like literally, I'm just why do something hard? And so one of the things about Pepperdine being a liberal arts school is that they make you take PE, which is pretty funny for college. It feels I mean, I think you could rebrand that now given the whole like wellness movement, and we totally understand how important it is to develop those habits, right? But anyway, so I was like, well, I'm not taking PE because that's ridiculous. And so all freshmen take PE because that's just like when you do it. So I didn't. So, after I had kind of had this realization of like, hey, I like saw myself in 20 years on a tour bus away from my family, whatever, that I didn't have at the time, obviously. But it's like, I just don't think that's the life for me. So switch back to bio. But needless to say, that had repercussions when I was a senior and had to take PE with all the freshmen. And I have this like distinct memory of like, we had to swim for like 45 minutes and I suck at swimming. And I like have this memory of like my PE teacher just like standing over me, being like, you will do this. And I was like, oh man, like this is what I got myself into back in the day when I decided I was gonna be a rock star instead of a dentist. So that's a little bit of my journey towards getting into dental school, I guess. And then from there, like I mentioned, had some interesting things that brought me to kind of my community health world that I spent some time in and whatnot. So.
Well, and an interesting note that I find fascinating is that your friend that was going to be a folk rock star with you actually became a doctor as well, of a physical therapist, right?
Yeah, he's a PM&R physician, so physical medicine and rehabilitation.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, no, totally. It was funny. They made a few records, kind of was in the Nashville scene for a little bit, and it was cool. It was super fun. He now lives in Cincinnati, and I think I was telling you the other day, he was just doing a spine procedure on the drummer from the National, which he didn't know at the time. He's like, oh yeah, what's your favorite band in Cincinnati? He's like, the National. He's like, oh, that's my band. And then that made my friend super freaked out. So, but yeah, so no, we both went from folk rock stardom to medical careers.
That has to be the first. That has to be the first.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you're in college. You decide, hey, I'm not going to do the folk rock star. I'm going to actually be a dentist. And what happened after college?
Yeah. So I moved to Colorado. I knew that this is a place that I loved. I grew up skiing in Southern Colorado and knew that I wanted to be here. So I moved. I worked for a year to get residency. So I worked at a biotech company doing mass spectrometry and things like that, which was pretty fun for a year, and then played soccer, did stuff that you do when you're 23 without kids, and went to the bars on Pearl Street and whatever. But yeah, I knew I wanted to go to dental school. So went to dental school in Colorado here. And like I said, really found, kind of was like, I want to skateboard with my patients. So maybe I'll be an orthodontist or something. As you do, right?
That needs to be on a t-shirt or a TikTok or something.
I want to skateboard with my patients. But yeah, like in that trip to Guatemala, I went actually a couple times. It was just really like, man, this really speaks to the part of me that, this is why I like want to be a part of healthcare, because I really want to help people who need it. And so, yeah, kind of led me to community health, and really wanted to work for an organization in Denver called Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, where they obviously do homeless healthcare. Turned out that it was not the plan for me. Ended up at a different community health center that was growing a lot, and feel really lucky to have been there, because it taught me a lot about how dental can operate as a part of health in general. It's a super leading kind of community health center in the country, so it was really great. I lost you, Gary.
Oh, sorry about that. So you were the second dentist at that organization, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was like one office, 4 chairs, happened to like get the job because the guy who was there, like I was on a rotation for school. He liked to go out to lunch a lot, and I like food too. I'm a super big foodie. Obviously, I think probably everyone who's like super into coffee is probably super into food too. Yep. So like we just went out to lunch all the time, and he liked me. I think, we got to know each other, and he got to like me, but he was leaving to go become an oral surgeon. And so he hired what turned out to be my boss from another community health center in Colorado. She hired me, and now it's 4 sites. It's, 25, 40 hygienists. I don't know. It's huge with like 15 dentists. It's, a lot of people, taking care of a lot of people in the North Denver area, which is really cool.
Yeah. And so what were some of the key things that you learned there or you started to develop as a young clinician?
Yeah, one of the obviously like so many cool things just in terms of like how dental care and medical care can kind of be integrated because we were really integrated in lots of ways.
Oh, wow.
So like our hygienists, we were one of the first clinics in Colorado, at least, but I think in the country that was really putting hygienists as a part of like the medical team. So when kids would come in to, have their child check, like the hygienist would see them and, do a screening and put fluoride varnish on and do all this stuff. Right. So they didn't even have to come and see us as a dentist, which was great. So yeah, lots of cool, innovative stuff like that. One of my mentors who started his career in homeless healthcare and is now back there, he introduced me to motivational interviewing, which is a huge part of my story. Certainly wouldn't be who I am and where I am without that style in terms of how we speak to patients and help them make behavior changes. So that was obviously hugely influential. I think it also gave me like a love for evidence. I'm like a super nerd in terms of some of that stuff, like always combing through the evidence. We got a precept student, so that taught me a lot about what it was like to, mentor people, bring them up, alongside, as a younger clinician and how to help kind of, not indoctrinate them. Right. But like, you kind of see, right? People are just so malleable at that phase. And how do you help them learn? And that taught me a lot about dental education and what I think, the future of that looks like. So lots of different pieces that I feel like I definitely wouldn't be who I am today without that experience.
Yeah. And for those who are listening, so explain a little bit about motivational interviewing and then how that came into your life and then how that really plays a big part in dentistry.
Yeah. So I, as a part of in that health center, we had these quarterly all clinician meetings, which was really cool. Another very, kind of innovative thing, right? Where you like bring everyone together, doctors, nurses, stuff that you're like, oh, I probably never would have been exposed to this if we were just doing our own little dental thing. And so we had this training, like 3 hours, motivational interviewing. What is this? I think like a lot of people, you hear the word interviewing as a part of it. And you're like, is this how I like ask questions when we're interviewing someone to be on our team? And no, it's not that. It's the style that started in the early 80s in New Mexico in the substance abuse world. One of the early founders lives there. Another guy lives in Wales. So kind of very two different clinicians, but a clinical psychologist. And essentially what they were seeing at the time was like very much like the peak of DARE, drug abuse resistance education. Yeah. If you grew up in my era of, everyone did that in school and whatever. But it was like very confrontational, very like scare you to make you not do things, right? You probably remember those commercials, Gary, of like, here's somebody that's, foaming at the mouth or something gross, right? To convince you not to do it. So anyways, they were just realizing from the evidence that was really not effective. And so they were students of Carl Rogers, who was really kind of a pioneer of a lot of the positive psychology movement in the 50s. Any of his original texts, I would highly recommend reading. Really cool, interesting stuff around counseling and how to effectively form a relationship with patients, a therapeutic alliance and that kind of therapeutic relationship. Really interesting guy. Anyways, that was, started doing a lot of research on it, found it was super effective, really helpful in terms of helping people change their behaviors when it came to addictions. And so people started saying, well, I wonder if that will work in primary care. Will that work in asthma? Will that work in diabetes management? Will that work in obesity management? And so, yeah, it turns out it does, really any chronic disease. And so when I found out about it, it's probably back in 2014, you started to see a few initial studies that were coming out of Australia and a few other places around, does this work in dental care? And so I was like, oh yeah, this is super interesting. Where can I go learn more? And in my search, found that there was no dental professionals really at the time who were offering training, whatever. So I was like, well, I can do that. I mean, because I think one of the unique parts about dentistry, right, is to sit in a dental chair and know what the time constraints are, all of those different pieces, right? It feels a little unique in how the patient kind of moves through the appointment or whatever. So yeah, I got trained in it from psychologists and psychiatrists and MDs, and became a member of what's called the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. So I've spent the last 6 years or so helping dental and medical professionals as well learn how to communicate with patients to help them make behavior changes. And it's cool because I feel like the evidence that's come out over the last 6 years has really just kind of enforced this idea of it's obviously more than telling people what to do. That's not why people aren't making behavior changes. So in a nutshell, I think that's kind of motivational interviewing is just a way of helping people change. And it's a pretty special, kind of therapeutic, creator that really makes a big difference when it comes to building trust, helping your patients feel like they're in control, all of those pieces.
So yeah, you used a term that helped me understand it a little bit better. You said engaging patients as partners. Can you touch on that a little bit? Like what does that mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, I joke with people that I've spent the last 5 years trying to forget that I'm a dentist so that I can better understand the patient perspective. And you have just talked to a ton of patients, the work I'm doing now, really trying to understand that patient perspective. And I think dental, for all of its good intentions, for many people has historically kind of been this like very paternalistic place of like scolding. I have a friend who literally calls his dental visit his biannual scolding. So, that's not a good place to come from. I mean, he's fine. He doesn't have cavities. He's healthy, So I can only imagine what it would be, right, if you were going in all the time and having problems and whatever. Yeah. Like there's a certain sense of shame around that and frustration and whatever. And so I think, if the advice of like brush your teeth twice a day with fluoride toothpaste and floss your teeth every day, and that's like what's going to solve the problem of cavities and dental disease in this world, if that was all we needed, I think it would have, been eradicated a long time ago. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And so what I saw is this really big need for, what does it look like to make dental care a little bit more human? What does it look like to create conversation instead of monologue, right? I think a lot of times it feels very unidirectional. Like, here's the information I need from my mouth and where the destination is your ears, but that's it, right? And instead, like what I've been trying to facilitate and foster is this, hey, we want to hear from you because that's a really important part of the story as we seek oral health together.
Yeah. 2 experts in the room, right?
2 experts in the room. I love it. Yeah, no, you're good at remembering all this stuff. Yeah, I mean, I wrote an article a couple years ago. We changed the title, but I feel like in some ways we're living this like post-expertise world where it's like, hey, everyone's an expert, so it doesn't really matter anymore. And so the original, it was like a very philosophical title. It was like the expert is dead, something. And the people who I was, I have a group of writing buddies, whatever, that I share stuff with, and they're like, yeah, like I get what you're trying to say, but like, there's definitely 2 experts in the room, and you need to remember that. And I was like, oh yeah, that's true. But yeah, obviously we have some clinical expertise in all the things we know about oral health town, right? We live here. It's great. It's a beautiful town. But the patient has a lot of expertise in themselves. And until we're able to share that together, we're not going to make the progress we want to make. And I think I liken it to a good guide, right? If you're going somewhere, you hire a guide, you expect them to have some expertise. But if they just like take you around, if they took me around to Seattle and were like, hey, here's the original Starbucks. It's like, I don't care about the original Starbucks. Like I want to go to the really good coffee shop, like take me to the best coffee shop, not the original Starbucks. They need to ask me that, right? Like what interests you? What do you care about? What's motivating you? Right.
You're the expert in what you want to see, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Right. So you're like, hey, like, let's do that a little bit more effectively. And here's, one of the things that I see is just the need, because I think clinicians want that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's not enough just to say you need to do it, right? We have to create the scaffolding by which people can, by which the grapes can grow up the vine, or by which the vines can grow up my analogy.
Yeah, I got you.
You got it. The grapes aren't going to grow, right, unless we build that scaffolding. So ultimately, if we want to produce the fruit, we need to build that scaffolding, not just say, hey, grapes grow. So that's really what, has been a big passion of mine over the last number of years is what does it look like to support both clinicians and patients in developing those skills that are going to help them achieve the goals that they both want to achieve.
That's great. And the reason I'm kind of drilling down on this is I think this is a big portion of how you got to where you're at today, and we're going to get into that in a moment. But I think probably after looking into your story and talking through it with you, I think the pivotal part of it is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, was you took a sabbatical. And can you walk us through, okay, I'm practicing and I'm doing all these things, and then I'm making this huge life altering decision. I know COVID ties in there. Just kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, by the way, I love your putting it all together. Like, you're more than welcome to say what I see as the pivot, because, it's like, yeah, it's my story, but ultimately, like, you learn a lot hearing what other people see and the inflections in the different places. It's like good songwriting. I don't know if I was saying that to you. One of my favorite bands is Vampire Weekend, and they're very much of the mindset, like, when you write a great song, like, you do it for yourself and then you put it out there in the world, and it's going to mean something different to every person. And, like, you can't really control that. Right. And in the same way, I love your perspective on my story because I think I learned something when I get to hear the lenses that you're wearing. So anyways, all that to say, I love
the sabbatical point for me is you got that front end that we just went through, you got the back end of where you're at right now. And that sabbatical seemed to be that axle in the middle of what kind of brought you to that. And I think it would bring a lot of people value to kind of understand your mindset of why you went into that, and then how it was radically different, right? Because there's a couple consequences, or a couple unforeseen circumstances, I should say. And then I think that will bridge us really nicely into the next part.
Yeah. Well, I think first, I'll say this first, right? For anyone who's listening, watching, whatever, the idea that taking a break can be hugely transformative. I don't know if I quite knew that before I did it, and I would 100% recommend it now, right? If you have the capacity in any way, shape, or form, even if it's a shorter amount of time. We were lucky enough to be able to do it for a full year. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but we're committed to that rhythm. So we already have our next one planned. We're going to go to Peru for 9 months, and it's going to be great, and a few more years. So all that to say, I would 100% recommend a sabbatical if you have the capacity to do that. But for me, I think how I came to it, I was going to write a book on this, right? Everyone was going to write a book. So I started, but I remember specifically the moment. I'm a big cyclist. And I was riding with my buddy. We would go ride at night because the roads were a little bit quieter and whatever. So we'd put on our lights and go ride at night. And there's this famous climb in Denver called Lookout. We were about to start kind of pedaling up that. And I remember clicking in and kind of admitting to myself for the first time, because I worked for this great organization, was the dental director there. It was like we were doing things. It was really cool. They still are. It's an awesome place. And so I think, it was hard to admit to myself, like, I just don't think this is right. I think I'm supposed to do something else now. And so I remember that ride kind of admitting to my buddy first, like, yeah, I think I'm done, and obviously it took, more time to be done. It wasn't like, okay, the next day I go and submit, my resignation or whatever. But I remember that ride, and I remember the process then of what it was like to kind of say, okay, like, what is the next step going to be for me? And I explored a lot of different things, but ultimately felt like, if I can pause for a moment, I think that will be hugely transformational, both for my family, young kids, things like that, as well as my professional development. So, I've spent a lot of time building paths around the yard. So we moved to this place in the mountains, and it was overgrown, lots of brush. It just hadn't been taken care of in a long time. So I'm clearing brush and building paths and doing all this stuff that theoretically has nothing to do with dentistry. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned from that time was having a space for what I call kind of soft focus, right? So I'd be building a path and, kind of thinking about, what does the next step in my career look like, or something like that, right? But I'm pretty focused on not dropping a 40-pound rock on my toe or something. But still, you don't have to pay quite enough attention to give all your energy to that. So it just allowed my brain the space to kind of imagine, to not have, I have to go inside and do something about this, but to just kind of play through some different scenarios, some different ideas that when you're just trying to put out a fire, do the next thing, respond to the next email, you just don't necessarily have the mental space to do that. And so I think I learned a lot from that soft focus time. And I think that's kind of some of the genesis of what I'm doing right now, came from some of the realizations that I had literally moving rocks or, cutting. Yeah, I was out yesterday. Like we're in a wildfire zone as everyone on the West Coast is, right? And they do some like mitigation where they'll clean up your sticks or your tree branches and stuff. So I was out with the chainsaw, like, slicing down branches and stuff. And it was like good to be back. I hadn't had the chainsaw in my hand in a while. I hadn't been outside, doing that kind of stuff, dragging branches, whatever. It's like, man, I need this. This is so valuable to me. So yeah, it was a really transformative year for us. And yeah, it was a bit before COVID. So I went back to work in July of 2019. Yeah. And yeah, COVID obviously was 8 months later. Right. So I joke with people that no one was certainly more prepared for COVID lockdown, especially the initial phases, than we were. Cause I was like, oh man, I know what it's like to have 3 meals a day with my family every single day and spend all of our time together and all of that stuff. I was well prepared. So March through May were great for us. We were like, hey, this is, just like going back to sabbatical rhythms. And then once we kind of had to start, putting real life back into what it meant to live in COVID, obviously we struggled in the same ways, but it certainly taught us a lot of things about those kind of values that I think a lot of people realized early days during COVID.
Yeah, definitely. And so you're in you're 6 months in, 8 months into your sabbatical. And when did you start making decisions around, okay, this is what I want to do next, and this is what I want to do?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't clear to me even at that time. So I've been consulting around motivational interviewing, shared decision making, person-centered care. What does that look like, feel like, sound like in dentistry? Have been helping, national collaboratives think about that. Been helping private practice organizations. Been helping academic institutions, different people. So I went back to doing that. But I remember some of the initial conversations that I had in terms of, I think we're missing a lever in terms of creating true change within the system. I had been focusing on helping practitioners change. And that's a really important part, right? Because I have a friend who likes to joke, and it's not quite a joke because I think it's pretty true, that, dentists practice how they're paid and what they learned in dental school. Right? Like, here's the two primary factors that are going to determine how you practice, which I tend to agree with in a lot of ways. All that to say, so I was, trying to help practitioners change. Obviously, there's lots of momentum and stuff happening around payment change and some of that stuff as well. However you think about that work is happening, right? But I was like, and that's not my space either. So are we missing one of those levers, right? And I think, I kind of tend to see the patient as this underutilized resource in terms of how do we actually help make change, right? If we're like, we can't show up at our patient's house and brush for them every night. So like they're a huge part of the change, right? The central part. And so I started kind of, I look back at some of the articles I was writing around that time and see the kind of germs or the seeds of some of the what I'm doing now with DifferentKind. See some of the seeds of that to say, hey, look, I think we can focus a little bit there and really help develop what the patient needs along with what the professional needs, and do that in conjunction, because ultimately you can't build anything in healthcare that's not really two-sided, right? Because ultimately a practitioner is going to have to interact with the patient. They're going to have to interact with payers. It's got to be at least two-sided, which creates a lot of complexity. It's not easy. And so that's, I think, some of where the space during that sabbatical allowed me to consider some off the wall, maybe kind of not the standard solutions, because I didn't have to go out and build them tomorrow. It just kind of allowed it to grow within me until it was like, I think there's something there. And even then, over the last year, as we've been working on it, kind of front burner style, it's changed a lot too.
Yeah, definitely. So now you're out of sabbatical. You're like, hey, I got this idea that I want to do something that's going to participate both parties at a minimum. How did that develop into what you're doing now? And then kind of walk us through what you're doing now and how that morphed out of that.
Yeah. That was a fun process as well. I had kind of started this consulting business, and I had experience doing that, and so I was like, okay, well, but to like come up with an idea for, hey, I'm not a developer, right? I don't know how to code, so to kind of say, hey, here's going to be a solution that I think will be scalable, which has always been my goal. Ultimately, I've been a big dreamer forever. And I don't know, maybe that comes like back from my rock star days, right? Of like imagining yourself on stage in front of a whole bunch of people and writing songs that like the whole world cares about, right? I've always been a big dreamer. And so in dentistry, my goal has always been to help dentistry feel different for patients in that way, and practitioners, right? Where I know that most people don't want to go in and like have to tell their patient every 6 months, hey, you need to floss your teeth better. Hey, you need to drink less soda. Hey, you need to do this. Like that creates tons of burnout, right?
Yeah.
So my goal has always been to kind of, if I can leave the profession in a place where it feels like, yeah, people operate as partners. People don't actively despise, the day that they have to go see the dentist, right? We know plenty of those people because so many people are scared and have had negative dental experiences in their life. If we can change that, that would be great. So, on a large scale, right? So I was experiencing it maybe on a smaller scale of like, hey, we're impacting 20 clinicians or 20 clinics or 100 or whatever with some of the work that we were doing. But what would it look like for that to feel different for the entire profession? So yeah, I remember pitching kind of an idea to my co-founder, I'm totally lots of expertise in this one deep vertical, and she puts together all the pieces for me. She's really smart and knows everything about everything else in dentistry, which is really great. I think I know a few things too, but, all that said, I remember pitching it to her and her be like, yeah, I think there's something here. Let's start to explore this. So yeah, we started a company last summer called DifferentKind. We're a public benefit corporation. So that was an initial decision that we made, a B Corp, right? So we're not certified yet because that process is a little overwhelming. If anyone from B Labs is listening, I think the process is a little overwhelming if you're a 2-person company. But that's certainly the goal, because we believe that, hey, there are more interests here than ultimately, like if you're a C Corp, right? Like the only interest that you have is to shareholders. And, B Corps have this kind of public benefit that's built into it. And I see that happening in healthcare more and more, where more and more companies are becoming B Corps and are incorporating as B Corps or are transitioning to public benefit corporations. And so we've been, kind of dreaming, how do we fill a niche that's not there? How do we develop tools that are going to be really beneficial towards ultimately providing better outcomes, helping patients feel more heard, helping dentists be able to communicate that in an effective way? So yeah, we've been working hard on all of those pieces, which is fun. And for a dreamer like me to look at the 30,000 foot view is fun. We're very much in the 2-foot view right now of rolling out product next week. So all of that's been a huge learning process. But I'm really excited because I see, just something different that we're building. Yeah. That's kind of why we called it DifferentKind, right? It's like, hey, this is a little bit different, but ultimately we're trying to produce this idea of kindness and of what it really looks like to operate as human beings in the space where I think in healthcare that's really needed.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that helped really clear it up for me of what you guys were doing, because I didn't fully understand it, was one of my questions was, well, what about Google, right? Like there's the Google reviews. Can you kind of give me your take on Google or Yelp in the healthcare from a healthcare perspective, and then also backfill in that how you guys are different from that?
Yeah. So our initial product that's kind of coming down the line right now, literally next week is being released to early users is this measurement tool where we help people understand what's happening in their practice with regards to some of this stuff, and then we actually help practices improve. And so some of that, when we are like, oh yeah, this is great, this is going to be really helpful, and whatever. And then quickly we are like, well, yeah, obviously there's a marketing component here, right? Because that's how a lot of practices are using the information that you're talking about, like Google reviews or Yelp reviews or whatever. And certainly I don't think that Google or Yelp or any of Healthgrades, the former CEO of Healthgrades has been mentoring me. He's lovely. He's really helpful. And looking at those platforms, there's obviously good intentions, I think, in some ways. kind of making a lot of information available to the public. But I don't think, especially like Google and Yelp, were formed with this true idea of like, hey, what's really going to be helpful here is transparency. We're going to create trust. We're going to, it's like, no, this is different, right? And I think most people know that, because if you go to get a hamburger and you go to Yelp and they've given you the wrong review, right? Or you don't try, like maybe it was full of fake reviews or whatever it was. That's inconvenient. But if you do that in healthcare, the consequences are obviously much higher. Mm-hmm. And so it's not uncommon for lots of places, especially kind of leading institutions around the country, hospitals and whatnot, right? They've had to do this for a long time in terms of understanding patient experience. What does that mean? What are all the factors that play into that? How does that ultimately affect net promoter score and, some of that stuff, right? Yeah. So they've had to report on that data for a long time, and they have to do that to get paid. We don't necessarily have to do that right now as a dental profession, but I think one of the things that I've certainly seen about COVID that it's done is kind of accelerated the gap between medical kind of innovation and where dental innovation has been. And I think it kind of significantly helped close that gap in a lot of ways. And so we just see lots of opportunity for practices to kind of want to skate ahead of the puck a little bit, if you will, and be like, hey, this is where it's going. And we see that. And ultimately, this is going to help us create trust with our patients. This is going to help us create trust with our communities, and to do some of that. So ultimately, I see some of those other platforms that are doing this work, and there's a lot of other companies that have been, spun off from those dependencies, right? Hey, everyone looks at Google reviews and Yelp reviews. That is 100% true. We are trying to build something that doesn't necessarily create the dependency on a system that we actually think is fundamentally flawed when it comes to healthcare, and how are we going to go about building the platform from the ground up in a really holistic and helpful way, not only for patients, but for professionals as well.
I love that. And then because I'm a marketer, right? So I think of this in the most simplistic terms of like, got good Google reviews, you're open, you're answering your phone, you're going to get new patients, right? So if you're marketing, right, getting your name out there. So what you're doing is you're approaching this from the patient standpoint of what does the patient want, right? And then also what does the dentist do and how we're communicating that. So walk us through, like, in a perfect world, and I know you may not be here yet, but if I'm a patient, I need a dentist or any medical professional. What in a perfect world in your brain, like, how does that transaction happen now? Where am I going? What am I searching? And walk me through that.
Yeah. I mean, for us, right, that long-term vision is we want to be that trusted touch point, right? The place where people, both dentists and professionals and, payers as well, at some point can kind of come and say, yeah, there's some really good things happening here. And that's a pretty fraught sandbox, right? Like no one wants to go play like with all three of those people in the same sandbox all the time. Because incentives haven't always been aligned and there's been issues and, whatever. So we totally get that. And if we were 25-year-old grad students, just coming out of our MBA or whatever from Sloan or something, you'd be like, I don't know if you know the problems, right? And it's like, well, the good part is we've been doing this for a long time. I think we do actually really deeply understand the problems that are there.
Yeah.
So anyways, what we see the opportunity to do is to help patients and to help dentists, right, find the right person. Ultimately, right, we see more and more as consolidation happens in the dental industry. There are we all have specific differentiators. There are certain things that I do that you don't do, and vice versa, right? We can't necessarily be everything to everyone. And so how are you differentiating yourself? What's important to you? And can we actually help that become an alignment, right? So if the right patient is in your office as a dentist, everyone's likely to be much more satisfied just to start with, right? If you have someone who's like, hey, we have a similar goal or a similar worldview or whatever, right? A similar approach to care. So that's kind of the front end. In the office, we've built this kind of unique set of clinical decision tools to help people make decisions according to their values and preferences. And certainly we see that from medicine as being very helpful. The kind of most prominent work around this has come out of Dartmouth. And one of their clinicians is on our advisory board, and he's like, yeah, I mean, we do this for like very rare diseases in medicine. I guess we just don't really think about it for like this very common situation in dentistry. And that's, kind of our realization at the beginning. So it's not just like, hey, we're going to help you find the right thing. It's like, hey, we're going to help that process of when you're interacting together be more effective, right? And we have other tools that we're building as well around that. And then on the back end, can we really help create that transparency and trust with this really good information? Can we help practices improve because of that? I think we can. And that's really what we're rolling out first as we look to kind of say, hey, here's how we can do this, and here's how we can help patients have a different kind of dental experience. Here's how we can help dentists develop a different kind of skill set that they may never have thought about in dental school or wherever, right, in the CE courses that they've currently gone to. So we think we can help them develop that as well.
So basically the patient would know a lot more about the dentist before they get there. Is that accurate?
Yeah. And how a lot of, like, I'll take the clinical part of this. So it's based on this idea called shared decision making, which sounds great, right? Like, who doesn't want to, like, about your healthcare? It's my body, like, it's my health, right? Like, how do we make a shared decision where it's like, yeah, I get your expertise, you get what I need. But I think what I've seen certainly in that space is a lot of, so to do that well, right, you have to understand some very technical things. So here are your options. Here's some very specific things about each of your options, right? Which requires looking at the evidence, which requires understanding success rates and all of those different pieces, right? But that's overwhelming as a patient. Like, if you told me, like, hey, here's 5 options, I want to get into some like really nitty gritty detail about each of those things, that's maybe a little overwhelming. And it leads me to ask you the question then, if you're the dentist here, like, well, what would you do? And that's fine, but like, you might not do the same thing that I would do. And so what we've really done is kind of started from the opposite end and built what we're building, all of it really kind of with this values first approach of like, what is important to the patient? And then how does that fit into, what's going on and what we can provide and all of those things.
You're not doing the Google search what you think's wrong, and you get a million different hits for that. And then you're super panicked and paranoid, and you have to go on medicine just for what you thought that you had. And you're not tackling it from that angle.
No. We're very much tackling it from the angle of what's important to you, which is a very basic question, right? But it's really led us into some fun, kind of categorizations of how do we think about dental treatment and what are the factors that go into play as patients make decisions. Some really fun conversations with patients around that to help to say, what would that look like if it was done a little bit differently? How would you feel about this? And, whatever. And with dentists as well, as we've, had dentists across the country using some of the early, kind of paper-based versions, like in true, startup style, right? Where you're like printing stuff at the local printer and having people use it in their office. And like, this is facilitating much better conversations, which was super cool. Yeah, super exciting for us.
Yeah, so that was actually my next question is what's changing on the doctor side to make that happen? Because something has to change on the office side to be able to get that information to the patients.
Totally. Well, and that's, I think, what I've learned a lot, doing the motivation interviewing work I've done over the last 5 or 6 years, right? Of like, here's this great style that is evidence-based that will help you communicate with patients better, create trust, help your patients make behavior change. Everyone wins. It's great. You're less burnt out. You're less frustrated with patients, blah, blah, blah. If you're a doctor, if you're a dentist. So when I was starting, kind of teaching people, I would just kind of be like, yeah, here it is. And people would be like, that's great. Like, I don't know what that looks like. And so over the last 5 years, what I've really had to reimagine then is the process of how do I kind of build those building blocks? How do I build that scaffolding like I was talking about earlier? How can I help craft some of the, hey, here's the first step, and here's how you climb up onto that box. And so that's been super fun with what we've been building here as well, because I think I'm just taking a lot of those learnings around behavior change, really, as we're trying to help people change. We're trying to help people do something that very few people go into a situation where they're like, you know what, I want to treat my patient with less empathy. I think that's not just really a goal I'm looking to. And it's like, no one says that, right? So that's great if we can agree on that, but then how do we actually do that? And so, but that's also from the patient perspective too, right? Like it's a conversation is a two-way street. So we've had to think about both of those things of how do we create tools that are going to help both people. And, early days of what we're building, in some ways, it's like more of like a tech-enabled service. It's not necessarily, just, hey, pull this off the shelf. It's not like a bond agent you just switch out for an old one, right? It's this process of relearning and reimagining. And so we've had to say, okay, how do we support that? Because we care, we really do care, and want, clinicians to see benefit from this and not just be frustrated or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that I ask myself, or anytime I'm looking at something new or a new way of thinking, is I always go, is this needed? Right. Mm. And that's how I ended up with the Google question. But something that you brought up that I was like, it was spot on, was around review gates. Right. Mm. And so, and everybody does it. Right. Could you walk me through that review gating process of what's happening and then how that impacts reviews, and then how, if you can, how your product is going to be able to fix that?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think the best way to describe it is something that we've all probably experienced, right? Because we've all probably downloaded an app, right? So you download the app, you've been using it for a while, something comes up and it says, hey, do you like using this? And you either say yes or no. And if you say yes, it's like, great, leave us a review on the App Store, or would you be willing to leave us a review on the App Store? If you say no, it says, hey, bring this information to us and we'll deal with it back channel. Okay, well, again, if you're dealing with an app that you paid 99 cents for, like whatever. But we've all been frustrated with that too, right? We're like, this thing had 5 stars, I thought, and then all of a sudden I use it, and we've all gotten an Amazon package in the mail that's like, leave us 5 stars, and if you don't, right, like, we're going to be sad. And then you get 15 emails from somebody that works at their company being like, are you sure you want to post this? Can you just change it? And you're like, no. So anyways, with healthcare, right, if you're like seeking a true data set around patient experience and actually striving to get better, which I think everyone wants, like every healthcare clinician that I know wants to get better. It might make us feel really good if all of our patients say, hey, yeah, you're doing a great job, 5 stars or whatever. But until we have the full data set, as a patient, I don't have it. It's not, no one is going to make a statistical analysis of that data set because it's not a full data set, right? You've automatically excluded some pieces. So that being said, Google specifically has a policy against that. But everybody does it. Everybody does it, right? They don't have oversight to that, right? Like that's the problem with big tech, right? So what, there's a few things I think you need to do to solve that issue. And the first of which is just to say, hey, look, like we want to work with people who believe that that's a problem. If you're like, hey, you know what, that's just good for me and my practice, and that's like what we're going to continue to do. Okay. Like absolutely, that's fine. Like there's plenty of solutions out there. So we want to work with clinicians that are of a like mind in that way to say, hey, we are willing to commit to trust and transparency in building that, because that's again where the puck is going.
That's scary though, right? That's scary because you're gonna find stuff out and it does impact you. But is there any really other way to get better without doing that?
True. And, I think one of the things we've seen is that's really scary in the wrong process, right? If from day one, I say to you, hey, look, Gary, like every podcast that you make, like that, is going to go up online. We're going to give it to a gajillion people and we're going to like let them all rate you. And then you're going to see it and we're going to make it public. And then we're going to like rate you, we're going to have our opinion on Gary based on that data. Yeah. Well, that is scary, right? Because you don't know. But if I come to you and say, hey, you know what, Gary, we're going to collect this data for a little bit. We're going to look at it together. We're going to help you figure out how to make improvements. We're, like you're going to have some time to be exposed to this data without it being this like huge public facing thing. And then we're going to say, yeah, like we want to make this data public because
it would be a bit like if you were going to run me through that process, I would want to know, well, are you sending it to the whole world or are you sending it to people in the dental community, right? Because the people in the dental community might find a little bit more value than just somebody who's online surfing the internet, which is a super niche subset. But to your point, like your patients are a super niche subset as well, right? So there's a process of just who's reviewing. And so what I'm hearing you say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're going to walk them through that process to figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to do that in a way that is helpful both for the clinician and for patients eventually, right? We're not just going to, whenever I do training, like I build training in motivational interviewing, there's like very structured, specific way where it's like, you don't want to get people too far along and, feel like you're tossing them into the deep end of the pool, right? Like you walk in with a zero entry and be like, yeah, let's build up some confidence, right? And in the same way, we don't want to just toss people into the deep end of this and say, good luck, like have fun swimming. Like no one wins in that situation. And so, yeah, we're 100% going to do that in a really, thoughtful and effective way. What we see as evidence-based of here's how true change can come about. Here's what the true leaders in this space are doing. Let's come be a part of that. And I think one of the cool things that I see, in this way, dreaming down the road, right, is for so long, so many innovations have come from medical, and then it's like, okay, well, how do we apply this to dental and whatever? And it's cool because I do think that because dentistry in this way has kind of been, we don't have some of those tools that medical has in this way. Like we can really be an innovator, and this could go the other way, right? Like this can come to, when we've had people tell us that, we've had medical clinicians be like, why can't I have that? Like, can I have that data? Can I show my patients that? Can I, have you help me improve or whatever? So yeah, 100%. We're excited about that long term.
That's so cool. Okay, so then walking through this, so we get some doctors on. The doctors in offices are participating. They're sharing this data. They're being transparent. The patients begin to interact. And one of my first thoughts are, well, how are you going to get the patients to trust you? Mm-hmm. Right? Like we there's a reason that we go to Google to look at the reviews, is because that's where we go to see if we like the taco shop, right? And I know that's a massive, when you pointed that out to me, like, yeah, that's great for taco shops. And if you get a bad taco shop, even though it had 5 stars, your loss is not that bad. But in medical, that's a big jump to go from I'm choosing a taco shop to a nail salon to I'm picking my doctor for my surgery, right? So that's a big jump there. How are you going to get the patients to trust you guys so that they want to use you and they want to go and use the doctors that are on there that are being transparent?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. Certainly something we've thought a lot about. And I don't know, if I have the perfect answer for this long term. I think we're still discovering from some very basic things, right? Around, hey, we are going to incorporate as a public benefit corporation because we believe that, I would rather buy clothes from Patagonia than I would from the Gap, because I think Patagonia has a really strong commitment to and demonstrable commitment to making the world a better place, right? Mm-hmm. And I can point at, public benefit corporation after public benefit corporation where you're like, yeah, like they're doing something really cool. So some of that is, even just built into that process around annual reporting, right? Like a lot of that stuff becomes more transparent inherently. So that was super important to us. We do have like a very basic pledge that we're going to roll out in terms of, hey, here's some like very core tenets of like what we're committed to as clinicians, right? As patients. We see that. I see that a lot in Europe. A lot of this work comes, is further advanced in Europe in some ways around person-centered care and what does that mean and how does that really impact itself. And so seeing some cool examples of that there. So I see that as something where, hey, like, we're putting down a line in the sand to say, you can come here and see what we're committed to. But then also, I think that from the perspective of the patients, like why would they trust us? Like why are we different than anywhere else? Is because just like the dentists, we'll be committed to this process of transparency. Like we're pretty open. Like we're willing to share. We're willing to help you understand. And ultimately, we're building tools that I think help quality and not just convenience. Yep. And that's a really hard bucket, and some people probably won't like that, right? Because things might change based on evidence or whatever. We've seen that over the last 18 months in some ways where it's like blowback on science, right? And you're like, well, theoretically, science is just the commitment to like continuing to learn and get better.
Yeah.
So if some people are mad about that, that's okay too. But we're gonna be pretty open about that and really try to give control in a lot of ways to other people in this process, whether that's patients to kind of create their own autonomy, whether that's dentists to really help us continue to learn, but to do so in a way where we kind of understand all the parties. So again, I don't know if I have the like perfect answer. We've just spent a lot of time thinking about how it impacts every aspect of our business, and every aspect of our platform. And hopefully it's like, I don't know. I think a lot of times people are like, you got to earn trust. And I kind of agree with that. Right. And we want to do that. We want to demonstrate, like, here's the ways that but I've always been a believer as a leader too, that like sometimes you just have to give trust. Right. And people are going to break that. But ultimately, as me on the leader, then to continue to say, hey, I'm going to continue to believe in you.
And you might have some people doing you some favors again with all these different platforms having, review issues where it's like, oh, there's a bunch of fake reviews. Like, that's going to continue to develop, and they're going to have to continue to battle that. And if there's an alternative that takes those things into consideration, as well as all these other things that you're discussing, I think patients will flock to that, right? If that's if they know where to flock to. So I think that's great. Is there anything else around DifferentKind that you would like to share that you haven't already?
We're excited to, again, we're kind of in that phase of where we're literally, our private beta is launching next week. And so if you're listening, if you're out there and you're like, hey, this is something that I think is intriguing to me, and we're certainly committed to that. And it's fun because I get to see, as a lot of consolidation has happened in the DSO world, and there's, and FQHCs where I worked, and, even just private practices that are solo still trying to differentiate themselves. You really see this commitment to kind of person-centered, evidence-based care that, empowers doctors. And like, man, that wasn't around 10 years ago. Like, I certainly wasn't seeing that kind of language 10 years ago. So I'm excited because I think, hopefully, right, we're on the right track. That's what we're trying to do. We think we are. But if there are people out there who, are listening or hearing this and are like, yeah, I think there's something there, we would love to talk to you. We're aiming to kind of have this private beta phase for a number of months. So if you're interested in, joining, we would love to talk to you. And even if we're, kind of full in that, we'd love to have you on our wait list to say, hey, when this rolls out full to the public, like, we want this happening, because we think
so cool.
Patients will benefit. So yeah, please, you can check out our website, differentkind.com, and get in touch. We would love to talk to you.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. And if I was a dentist, I'd be at the front of that list. I would want to know how to make this happen. Someone's going to figure it out, right? Like, someone's going to make that platform better for the end user and for the doctor. So great job on that. I'm super excited to see you guys roll it out. All right, last question.
Yes.
What is your favorite or most impactful marketing campaign of all time?
So this is, I've been thinking about this. I've really been kind of processing this in my brain, and how is good marketing, affecting me. I think, so it's funny because I tell people a lot of times when we think about, how social behavior changes, right? So the reason that like teenagers are doing what they're doing is because there's peer pressure, right? They're all around a whole bunch of other dumb 16-year-olds who are like, yeah, you should, do this dumb thing. And they're like, yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. So thinking about stuff in my life that I love, right? Coffee or things like that. My son was asking me, he's like, can I drink coffee? And I was like, I'm excited for that day. Not quite there yet, 6-year-old, but I'm excited for that day. But I was just thinking about my own process of like coming to start to like coffee, and, kind of being exposed and like, this is cool. This is something that is attractive, right? I think interesting people or whatever I was thinking when I was 16 are doing this. So that's something that I want to do. But I keep coming back, and this is super recent, and I think maybe aligns with this what you were talking about. So my favorite soccer team is Liverpool. Huge Liverpool fan. Had the privilege to be at the last game at Anfield, which is their stadium.
Wow.
In Liverpool, right before the lockdown happened. So March 8th of 2020. We'd had this trip planned for a long time. Like, this happened to be the last game with fans for a long time.
I've heard soccer games are just like nuts.
It was crazy because it was like, they call it a lunchtime kickoff. It was like 12:30. We just come from breakfast, whatever. And, apparently those are like the more mellow games, like once people have had a chance to like drink a few more pints at night, like they're crazier. But I was like, man, this is way better than any American atmosphere I've ever been to at a sporting event. So anyways, they switched sponsors recently, and Nike sponsors them now. And, I've always kind of been like, I don't know, like, I just remember like Nike, having a whole bunch of issues with, their public image a number of years ago. And anyways, all that to say, I just found myself like happening to kind of be on the Nike site more. And, obviously I have like a Liverpool jersey, but it's kind of like, man, there are some like really cool shoes. And now, the favorite like two pairs of shoes that I own are both Nikes. I was on the site this morning, like looking for my wife, being like, man, like she might need some new Nikes. And all of my 3 little kids, like first day of school, had their new Nikes. So it wasn't like this like one specific campaign around this. It was just kind of like, hey, I'm going to associate, you know, this brand that I love, Liverpool, has associated themselves in this way with this brand. And inherently, like, how does that create trust? I don't know. But it did for me in terms of, wow, now I certainly own a lot more Nike things than I did before. And see, like, I'm not what are they called? Like shoe heads or something? I don't know. Sneakerheads? Yeah, there you go. Shoe heads. That sounds stupid. Sneakerheads. But I've like found myself on like some of those, you know, sites or whatever, where you're like, man, here's this Japanese designer who's also a musician who's like producing this like new collab shoe, you know, in coordination with, I'm like, how did I get to here? But I guess I can owe it all thanks to Liverpool, right?
Yeah, so I just looked it up. They only paid $37 million a year for that sponsorship, which I know sounds like a boatload of money, but if every Liverpool fan is going out and buying one more pair of Nikes or weren't buying Nikes before, that is absolute. The amount of eyeballs on soccer is insane. So,
my wife doesn't care about Liverpool at all, right? And now she's wearing them too. So you know that like you know that knock-on effect of like, hey. In the same way, right? Like you create trust with one person, somebody tells somebody about that, here's this, here's that, right? And I think that, but ultimately that has to be built on something foundational, right? So if Nike made terrible looking shoes that fell apart in 2 months, I certainly would not be sitting here telling you about it. And in the same way, right? Like if we're not building the foundation of what we're doing on something that is good and trustworthy and making the world a better place in some way, hopefully.
Marketing's not going to fix that. Yeah.
Marketing doesn't fix that. Right. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I appreciate it. Great content today. Very, very helpful. And I can't wait for your launch. After your launch, I want to talk to you again. And I want to talk through some of the stuff that on a bigger scale of now we got this many clinics on, this many doctors on, and this is what we're seeing. I am fascinated about this and I cannot wait to learn more.
Let's just talk about data points, like, right? Like let's bring together a whole bunch of data and like talk about it. Hey, here's what we're seeing. And you can tell me like all the things that you've seen from all the insights that you've had over the years. Like I'm excited to marry some of that information together.
I literally get excited about that kind of stuff. I can't shoot a podcast about it because no one will watch it, me talking about numbers, but definitely excited about seeing that.
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to that as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, man.